Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of the talk show. So today we have Paul Masvidal all the way from the US. Hi, Paul. Welcome.
Hi, Ashla.
Yes. So first of all, just give a brief biography and introduction of Mr. Paul Masvidal. He's a renowned musical artist from the US, having played with Cynic, Death, Aeon Spoke, Onward with Love. And he has recently released a trio of LPs called Mythical Human Vessel under the Masvidal moniker. His artistry extends into films, TV shows, and he has also worked with Jim Carrey. Masvidal is also an inventor with Vidatech Easy Board and Orgonite amulets, which we will ask him shortly. And he has interests in spiritualities, particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, as well as cosmology, extraterrestrials, and UFOs. Wow, what an introduction! It's almost like a multifaceted, dimensional being, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the name of this episode will be Buddhalien and Interdimensional Exchange. We will get more insight into Paul's ideas on cosmology, consciousness, extraterrestrials. So first of all, Paul, what inspires you these days? Would you like to share with our viewers?
What inspires me right now at this moment?
Yes.
Well, I feel, as an empathic person, I feel, obviously we are, as a species, suffering a collective trauma. You know, the world is changing, the external world at least. And so I feel I'm absorbing that energy now. For a while there, I was, because of my own personal experiences, I was a bit paralyzed by everything. And just because of personal experience and then the external stuff of what's been going on in the world. And it really put me into a somewhat of a catatonic state. I wasn't able to do very much. I found myself exhausted and overwhelmed, and I was kind of going through different phases of navigating the energy because I was empathically, I feel like I was absorbing a lot. And but I feel like I've turned the corner. So at this moment, I've transmuted this energy, and I'm using it as a creative tool, as a tool to kind of push my creativity forward and to make things. So I'm back in this. I'm in a process, and I'm finding a way to transmute this stuff that was really heavy. It felt very heavy, and it's almost like what I visualize when I do a Tonglen practice. You know, it's this tar. It was like a black tar, you know, and now it's I feel like I am taking the tar, and you know, there's light coming out. You know, there's a transmutation happening. And you know, for a while there, I was getting sick doing the Tonglen practice, I guess. And now I'm not getting sick. I'm more charged and able to. And it's interesting to see how this has affected people, artists, you know, throughout this process, because we're now however many months into this situation. And some people immediately took to it and were immediately in a process, and others were less, you know, like me. It took a minute here to kind of get into something, but now I feel like I'm working with it, and I feel pretty good, actually. You know, I'm grateful for the refuge I have of my home. I'm grateful for having a creative process, and my practice, and just one moment at a time, you know, because there's a lot of suffering out there, and just trying to kind of stay mindful of that, you know, to realize, although I can feel okay in my own process, to not forget that it's not like that for most of the world.
Yeah.
And, right.
Yeah.
You have to keep that in mind. It's,
definitely challenging times. And you mentioned Tonglen practice as well. And for those viewers who are not familiar with this practice, it's used in Tibetan Buddhism, and it's a form of an equalizing and exchange sort of a meditative practice where the practitioner actually takes upon the suffering of sentient beings, either a particular individual or a group of individuals, and we purify that space. So it's more like a very psychic form of purification. At the same time, it also clears any kind of animosity within our mental state of well-being regarding the person and whatnot. So it's a very transformative, healing and restorative form of a technique. So that ties in with the next question as well. You mentioned about this creative energy during this period of time. So how can music at this point of time be used as a self-transformative tool for you?
I feel like it's always been, in a way, since I was a child. It's kind of kept me out of trouble in a sense. You know, it always gave me something to do rather than be bored. You know, I always had work to do. I always, you know, especially when you get into playing an instrument, it just feels like you'll never master it. So there's just an endless journey of kind of working with the instrument. So that for me has been an ongoing situation, but especially now I'm just noticing, because of, you know, again, what I've mentioned, which is these external circumstances, and then these immediate circumstances in my own life that have affected me with my own colleagues and bandmates. It's kind of been a journey inward, again, to figure out who I am and what I'm trying to say, or just to kind of clean the vessel so that the information can pass through, you know, clearly. Because in some ways it never feels like it's really you, you know, it feels like you're just being used for information. So I'm trying to just stay in the moment and really just keep returning to what needs to happen. And part of this for me is balance. I have to know when to stop and know when to step away and to come back. And it's really, it's a dance of coming to it and stepping away and coming to it and stepping away. And it's not that different than, you know, a meditation practice, in the sense that you just have to kind of keep steady and keep going. And sometimes it's not great, and other times it's wonderful, and most of the time it's kind of neutral, you know. So riding the waves, you know, the states of mind that go with any process, but it's therapeutic for me to play and to make music and to use it as a tool to stay here, to stay in the moment. Because usually you forget about time when you're in a creative process. You lose track. Like hours go by often for me if I'm in a flow state, you know, and it's suddenly I realize 2 or 3 hours have gone by. And I'm grateful that I'm spending that time, you know, in a creative process rather than looking at my phone or on the internet, you know, which can also happen for you know, it's happened for me, where I suddenly realize, wow, I've been looking at my phone and it just time, you know, it's, so I'm glad I've shifted that. It took a while to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess also when it comes to technologies, I mean, with phone or internet, I guess it's also like the quality of content. Like, you know, I mean, it depends whether we are aimlessly scrolling or whether it's something more informative or educational, which we actually which inspires us, right? There are different kinds of information and different kinds of you know, whether it's in the form of videos or visual arts or music or whatnot. So yeah, I think it just depends on the way we use it sometimes. I think in this world we have been very technological savvy and technological dependent in some way, and of course I think being non-attached and moving back a bit really helps, but also at the same time, like, our mindfulness while using the technologies as well. I think that ties in with the next question of throughout the time you've been doing music, over 3-4 decades now, and how would you share with the viewers in regards to any kinds of techniques or any kinds of methods of mindfulness and music for you, incorporating mindfulness and music?
You know, it's you're bringing me back to, you know, one of the things I've said to a lot of students, and what I'm always reminded of when I go through my own creative process, which is to be patient and gentle with myself, because it's not always flowing. It's not always going to go your way. And so you have to learn how to provide some gentleness for yourself and kindness when you're in this process. It's really a journey of relaxing and being at ease and learning how to, at least for me, it's a way of, I have to learn how to be gentle with myself in order to kind of return to this and to really feel like I'm doing something that feels meaningful. You know, like that's the thing. There's a difference. There's certain times as a musician where I've taken jobs. You know, I've worked as a composer, and it's different. You're doing a job. It's like, but the creative process, when you're writing your own music, when you're creating from, you don't know where it's coming from, it's a different animal because you don't have that structure. It's like, it's a very, at least for me, it's very much like a nebulous, and you know, you don't know where it's coming from. You don't know where you're pulling from. And like, especially even these days, although I'm actively in a creative process, I find even now, some days it's flowing and there's things that make sense. Other days I feel like I should just put everything down and leave and just get some air. You know what I mean? And it's learning when to do that. It's like almost like having some kind of gentleness with yourself to know when to pull away and to come back to it. And so I always encourage patience and gentleness when you're in a creative process. I think that's really key with this type of work, is knowing, getting to know yourself and knowing when you need to come to it and step away from it. And I had an incident just a few days ago where I had somewhere to go in the evening, and I had been working all day and I didn't really like anything that was happening. And I just was committed to like get this one thing down. And I was like, I will not get up. I was hungry. I wanted to eat something before I left. And I like kind of put myself in this state of like a little bit of a torture, you know, to just kind of get this thing down. And sometimes what's interesting about that is sometimes that act of discipline, like suffering, it makes me think of like when you're doing long sits on a meditation retreat, you won't get up, right? You're trying to sit for 3 or 4 hours and everything's hurting. You just keep pushing through it. It was like one of those, it was like I'm just going to push through this. And I did eventually get this thing recorded that I was really just suffering through. And then I left and I shut the computer down and I, just shut my studio down, and I went and did my thing, and I didn't listen to anything till the next day. And I went and listened and I thought, wow, this works. This is a good idea. So it was like a moment where I was pushing myself out of my comfort zone, out of my cocoon. So when there's a fine line there when you say, or when I say patience towards oneself, it's not about like, going and eating dessert and getting a massage, and like there is self-care to it, but you have to also push yourself a little bit and know your edges and get out of your comfort zone. I mean, at least if you want to create something new, there has to be some stretching and some discomfort. And that's inherent. That's true in any form of growth, in terms of like expanding your mind, even they say physically, if you want to build muscles, you have to almost write this pain, no gain thing. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but there is some truth in that metaphor that you have to get out of your comfort zones. You have to keep pushing into the places that scare you. You have to meet, the shadows. And so it's a combination of those two things, I think, of gentleness, loving kindness towards oneself, and also getting a little bit into your edges and pushing yourself as well, you know, getting uncomfortable and not, you know, knowing that you have to push through it. And so it's really those two things that are kind of in balance, it seems, for me.
Yeah, you mentioned patience, and I think that's one of the 6 paramitas, one of the 6 perfections in Tibetan Buddhism. And also you mentioned loving kindness, one of the 4 immeasurables as well. So I think it was Shanti Deva who mentioned that patience is actually one of the strongest virtue, you know, to overcome whether adversity, whether it's anger, whether it's challenges. Patience is the one which perseveres and it gives you the kind of vigor, you know, I think on any point in our path, in our practice. And you mentioned also, yeah, about this creative process, and it's almost like the 6 years Siddhartha undertook, right? The ascetic practices, the austerities. It's almost like you have this kind of like ultimate goal towards a certain form of a release, a certain form of liberation in a way. And yeah, so you have to kind of use perseverance, but in a loving and in a kind way. So yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, it makes it. You're reminding me of a story, and there was a book I read a long time ago called The 3 Pillars of Zen.
Right.
And it was a lot of stories of Westerners that went seeking enlightenment at Suzuki Roshi, I think, or what's his name? He had a temple, and it was like school teachers and, you know, people with families. They just went to wake up, you know, and they went and they did these like. There was all these stories, and I remember one in particular was a story of a couple that went, a husband and wife couple, and one of them, like, they were like drinking coffee literally to just keep sitting, you know. It was like they were caffeinating themselves. And I remember like asking one of my meditation teachers, that I was like, is it okay if I caffeinate, you know, when I sit, because it just keeps me, you know, like, you know, it's this balance. You can't, like, you don't want to be crazy wired, but it's okay to have a little coffee, you know. But it was one of those things where I thought it was very inspiring to hear that, because it made me think these people were pushing towards something. They were getting out of everything that was comfortable to try and it's not like it's a goal. Do you know what I mean? There's a paradox here. There's always the oxymoron at work. It's like, you're not trying to get somewhere. You're actually trying to take things. It's like you're taking off things, you know. It's the opposite of attaining, you know. It's like you're taking off layers. You're peeling off, but it's perceived as getting somewhere, you know. It's this, you know, and there's the right effort, you know. It's in the trainings as well. It's like this effort to push, but it's, again, I see it as like you're pushing towards letting go. You're pushing towards releasing, towards relaxing. It's the opposite of what we normally associate exertion with. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's not how we typically, the model of exertion is in terms of what we think, go get it. It's not go. Do you know what I mean? It's the opposite, but it's hard to explain. It's a very complex thing, you know.
Yeah, it's almost like a very grounded, balanced, middle way approach between the extremes, isn't it? Between a very more aggressive or more too lax, dull. You know, it's something right in between. You know?
Right in between.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, moving a little, expanding a little bit on this conversation, we've spoken a bit about mindfulness, self-transformative methodologies with music. Would you like to share with us a bit more about some of your artistry with orgonite recently? You've been doing some amulets I see on your page. Would you like to share with us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So I've been interested in sacred geometry for a long time, and I've been fascinated with basically clear, like, things that I don't know, where this is rooted from, probably some past life, but ever since I was a child, I always was fascinated with translucent objects, like things that were suspended or floating. And I remember years ago, a gardener that had worked for my father or something. It was like a guy that, this was when I was a child, he had this watch that was like a vintage watch, but it had this kind of half dome that was clear on the surface. And it was just, it had this futuristic component. And I was literally, 7, 8 years old. And I just remember being so fascinated with that watch that when I reached my like teens or, late teens, I was looking everywhere for it. I wanted to find a watch that was similar to that looked, and it just had this, it's almost like, you see a UFO and there's the, the little viewing area, the capsule at the top of the UFO. It's like, that's what the watch had looked like, it was this little dome, like a half dome. And so whenever, I got obsessed with, I've always been obsessed with these kind of translucent things and clear, and so eventually I came across, resin and orgone, and I saw it, I can't remember, I started to collect it. And I didn't think I would actually make it. I was just a fan of the art form. And the more research I did, the more fascinated I become. I got into Wilhelm Reich, who was basically a radical scientist who fled Nazi Germany in the 30s. He came to the United States. And he was similar to Tesla in that he figured out, free energy. He figured out all these things, and he was really very cutting edge radical scientist who was actually put in prison by the FDA and killed. I mean, interestingly enough, like kind of one of these guys that was shut down. But the more research I did, I got fascinated, and then I started to experiment, and I started to call people. I was like finding people on the internet that were making it. I started to email. There was one lady who was so interesting. One of the first people I started to communicate with was who was making these little alien heads out of orgone. I'll show you one. I have one right here, actually. She was making like these, evil beings. And I actually got these on eBay. And I remember like emailing her, and she was like, it turned out she says like, yeah, I'm the alien grandmother. That's what she called herself. I'm the alien grandma. And I was like, wow, you're the coolest grandmother around if you're making things like this. And she was, making there were all these little alien heads. And she was the first person that gave me some instruction on how to make it. So and then more people, and then I studied. I went and did a retreat with with a master orgone maker up in Northern California, a guy named Branch Ellison. And that's when I realized how deep this work was, like how you literally, it's a full-time job if you want to do it properly. It's not, so what first became this interest as a hobby, I started to really realize this is like, it's going to take as long as I've taken to get on, be good at guitar. It's one of those things, there's all this science involved with resin, and it has to do with the chemistry of how you combine, the catalyst and the resin and all this. But more than anything else, I got more interested actually in making this stuff, merging it with sacred geometry, bringing this extraterrestrial component to it, and doing unique designs, like basing them off crop circles. So it was like merging, the orgone world with the extraterrestrial world, which I hadn't seen done before other than this, but like the crop circle component. And now it's pretty common in terms of sacred geometry and orgone. But this is something that I feel like I have just scratched the surface of this work, and I will be going deeper, like in the coming years, like deeper, way deeper, like where it's going to be a full-time kind of thing for me, other than music. It's like I definitely want to dedicate and I just haven't had the time to fully dedicate, and because I just know how much it takes to do it properly. So that's next. After I finish this record, that's kind of where I'm, that's the plan, is to go deep into the organ. And then I've been, making these guys, different, based off different sacred geometric shapes. These are actually laser cut stainless steel, and then they're plated. Some of them are PVD plated. I did 3 different designs to start, and they're all basically. And then these malas, are kind of beaded with different. My friend Lily has been making these for me, but it's I'm going to be making them. But the idea is that they'll be sold either as malas or just as, you can just get these alone or with a chain. But again, it's all based off these principles, of sacred geometric principles, and merging it with the extraterrestrial component. This is my own design.
So all this fascination, was it around the time you released Mythical Human Vessel as well? Like, was this all around the same time in the last year or so?
You're saying this stuff?
Yes.
I went deeper into it around the mythical, but I've been kind of into the organ and all this far long before, in terms of collecting it and doing it. But yeah, right around when I started to release that stuff and make those records is when I went, and maybe slightly before is when I started to really get into the work. A friend of mine was so kind to let me convert part of his garage, who lives just up the road from me, into a lab. So I have like a workspace.
Nice.
Which is really helpful because, especially working with resin, it can be very messy.
Right.
And it's just, there's a lot of, you're wearing a mask and all this stuff. Yeah, it's exciting. It's one of those things where I'm excited that I never, as a musician, imagined that I would be interested in the creation of physical objects.
Right.
Like, I drew as a child and stuff, but once I got into music, that was it. And it's interesting that now, here in my 40s, I've kind of discovered that I'm finding equal joy in making things with my hands, as I would in writing a piece of music, which is really, it's great to have that happen. It's something that I didn't expect. And so, yeah, the journey continues,
Yeah, it's like a different chapter, or rather a different book in its own right. Yeah. And it's also a form of expression. It's artistic, it's it's creativity, it's a form of self-expression, it's a refuge in a way. So it's still channeling from the creative energy, just the manifested form is in a different dimension. But very interesting.
And that's what's really cool, and I didn't mention this, is that organ, based on studies that have been done and people that make it properly, if you do it properly, it basically produces negative ions, like what the ocean produces. It blocks electromagnetic frequencies. It does all these things. And a lot of people argue it's a pseudoscience. There's a lot of naysayers against the organ world, but there was people actually years ago, and you can find them on YouTube, that in Germany, like proper scientists that did studies and like measured the energy that it was emitting. So it's kind of, it feels, rather than just interesting, beautiful objects, it feels like it serves a purpose, like it's functional. And I like that. I like that it actually does something, like my home is filled with organ. It's literally like everywhere. And I actually do think it produces some kind of field, you can feel it, there's a certain, like these little babies are really interesting, these pyramids.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah, like it's what's interesting. Yeah, this is based off, it's the same. If you look at this, see this design, which is, like a hexagon with 3 spheres. It's the same thing. See, it's the same. Yeah. So yeah, this was kind of, there's a lot of but this is a an interesting idea in that it has these steel balls coming down like cylinders, and then it has the crystal in the center, so it kind of creates this vortex. And yeah, I just love looking at this stuff. I feel connected to it. It's nice to
Yeah, who knows?
probably be some man in some festival selling this at a table. You know what I mean? Like, who knows? Like long gray hair, I mean, it's like, I don't know. Or I'll be in a monastery or something. Like, we'll see.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, it seems that with this organ project that you have as well, it's ongoing, and you are already investing a lot of your ideas which you have musically in terms of the creative expansion of the different topics, whether it's extraterrestrial, whether it's ethereal, and maybe it could even be something you might even combine with Buddhist cosmology and the different deities, and it's just so many things you can get into.
That is and it's like, and those practices where you become the deity, and like you can absorb their qualities. And I was thinking about that, like, I've never done those long term, but those practices, it occurred to me, it's like, what if you did those every day for years? I mean, can you imagine the transformation? I'd like to get into that. Have you been practicing those, or?
Yes, the Yidam practices, deity yoga, as some people might call it. So usually in the Tibetan tradition, for those who are not as acquainted, usually when it's through a guru that you are given an empowerment or form of initiation, or rather it's a kind of a permission in a way to do this practice, and then there's the relevant sadhana, which are more like the methodologies and the sequence of practice. So there's a lot of visualization. Even for those who do not have the empowerment or initiation, you can visualize the deity either in front of you or sitting on top of on top of the skull. So it's like the crown chakra. But for those who have the initiation or the empowerment, the permission, you can visualize yourself as the form of the deity. So many transformational kind of experiences. So to answer your question, I do practice the ones which I am empowered in. The ones which I'm not, traditionally just in a form of visualization on the crown chakra, but very, very empowering, very transformative. I think visualization has a lot to do with, to actually kind of intensify your practice in terms of quicker transformation, in terms of overcoming suffering much more, in terms of attaining much more joy, if you are able to actually have this creative visualization. And I think for us being into the creative work, I think it might be, I wouldn't say easier, but it's much more manageable to actually hold an image of single pointed concentration. And it's very, because inspiration comes in very, it can come in many different forms, inspiration. And a lot of the times we can have inspiration while walking into the park or having a shower or even doing non-related creative stuff, right? I mean, it comes in a very incorporeal, etheric kind of realm. So it's really interesting. So if we move this conversation more into the fascinations you have with extraterrestrials, aliens, and all this, recently as well, I've been watching a few documentaries, been reading a bit as well, and I'm sure you have at the same time. So this whole ancient aliens, ancient astronaut theory, what would you like to share about it? How have you been introduced to this? Have you been fascinated by this? And what are your current take on this in regards?
I was introduced to that originally by what's his name? Chariot of the Gods.
All right. Was it Eric von Däniken?
Eric von Däniken, yeah. It's funny, that book came out a long time ago, I guess, but I first really got it hearing him in a live lecture at Contact in the Desert, and where he just kind of did his talk about that whole theory. I find it fascinating. I mean, the whole idea of like taking, for example, the Bible and swapping out, you know, all the angels as extraterrestrials, it suddenly makes sense. Like it's a very practical, and just these beings, you know, of other higher dimensions. It all like makes a lot of sense. I think it's really healthy to be open to the possibilities of, you know, the incredible vastness and unknown nature of reality. And I think that there's a real issue with modern science in that they live in the realm of, you know, it's very narrow. Everything's just based on data and science. And it seems like a lot of times it feels very almost like ignorantly smug, you know, in terms of like basing your view of reality on something when we're literally on this ball floating in blackness, you know, like the reality of like what's going on, you know, and how much potential there is out there. But the ancient alien stuff, yeah, Eric von Daniken was really who introduced me to it, and it makes a lot of sense to me. There's so many. It's one of those things where I've taken a little bit from each of those worlds and kind of started to, like, I'm not really set on anything. I feel like the student that's just kind of gathering data and really observing and starting to trying to make sense. Who's the charlatan? Who's telling the truth? But, you know, what's like another fascinating component to all of this is, which people, you know, often don't realize, because it's like when some people want to talk about the extraterrestrial stuff, it's like, what area? You know, like there's so many layers. It's like an academic, it's like there's just so many components. And one of them, which came up for me again recently, was the military side of it. Like the history, you know, especially like here in the United States and even in the UK, there's books, there's literally documents of a history from the military of data of UFO, of craft, right? Down to where these incidents that are logged, and what's fascinating, there's literally a history of incidents of UFOs dismantling nuclear bombs at test sites. Like, I mean, it's incredible. Like the data is there. There's like dozens of ex-military. Half of them are dead at this point. We're talking guys from the, you know, 30s and 40s and 50s that spoke about this stuff at the end of their life, you know, when they didn't care anymore. They just, and it's, so I'm fascinated with all of that as well. It's just, there's so many layers, and what it introduces to me is that depending on the star system, I mean, you know what I mean? It's like, it's so deep that you could give a lifetime of work to just that alone, you know, researching this. Like there's been a lot of interesting people who've, you know, Eric's one of them, you know, Mary Rodwell. I don't know if you ever read any of her books. She wrote a book called Awakening that was really interesting. You know, Johnny Mack was one of the great voices. He was a Harvard psychiatrist, you know, who got really into the abduction side of things. I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big subject. It's a vast and it's an ever-growing subject as well. I mean, for those people not familiar with the ancient astronaut theory or ancient astronauts, usually it's about a claim that intelligent, advanced civilizations of extraterrestrials once visited the planet or inhabited the planet, and this had an effect on the evolution of humanity. So it's a bit of a different from the conventional Darwinian concept. This is an added element, the missing piece, if some people might want to call it. So you have people like von Däniken, which we were mentioning, Chariot of the Gods. We have people like Zecharia Sitchin.
Yeah, the whole Anunnaki component, which is, I mean, it kind of connects to Däniken's stuff as well. And then, you know, and all of that is kind of rooted in some ways to a scientific theory, which is directed panspermia. I don't know if you've heard of that,
Yes.
but the idea that this is a seeded planet, right?
Right.
And it's interesting if you do research in all the different areas about that subject, it does, the dots do connect. Like from all the sources, they all meet somewhere. It kind of makes a lot of sense. And it's funny when religious people are, will say, well, it's like if you sit there and you analyze what it is to have a religious belief that you believe, it's as far out, if not further out than these things in some ways, but again, it's because of culturally, unfortunately, the alien stuff became very taboo. There's a lot of stuff that Hollywood's done to kind of make it silly, and downplay what's been going on. I mean, down to even the story of Project Blue Book, how all the disinformation that happened with all that stuff. It was unbelievable, the lengths they went to try and disrupt what was happening, because they were afraid of disinformation becoming, it gets people out of their program. And
it's very similar to what happened at Roswell, for example, right? How they've covered it up with a weather balloon when they found different kinds of different kind of elemental metals and all that, which were not from this earth, and even first-hand accounts from the farmer and all that. It's very mysterious how these things work, and I think it ties into something you mentioned earlier about discernment. Just like in any point, any facet of life, whether it's spirituality, to have a spiritual discernment, highly encouraged to cultivate that. And even in this realm of knowledge, of information which is coming through, because even from the conventional mainstream medias, certain things are allowed to be broadcasted, which have been declassified in a way. So, really it's a trickle down, like a top down effect. What are the classified information then? What are the things which have been discovered by different agencies around time, by the Soviets, by the Chinese, by the Americans, and many other governments and scientific researchers, which have been covered up and all that. So, that's I believe to some level in alternative news and in the mainstream media, there's a certain amount of information, misinformation, and disinformation at the same time. So this also ties in also with discernment, especially a lot of new religious movements since the 1960s and UFO cults as well in the last half a century or so. Some, as much as you and I are very passionate about these subjects, but I feel some of it have been too over the top, too over exaggerated to a certain extent. And there's some level of misinformation or disinformation. It's almost like fantasy-like and fiction being added into a kind of cosmology.
They use those real extreme people to discredit, right? And suddenly everyone gets discredited. It's like they're able to take. It's like you start to sound like a crazy person. Do you know what I mean? And it's like it's this thing of people. It's really our duty to be vigilant and to stay awake, because we're so programmed. We've been so programmed for a lifetime culturally by everything we've read and we've been told. To undo all of that is the greatest job of your life, to really see through without all this junk we've been fed, of how we think reality works, and to stay open to the possibilities. It's really important. But you have to have an inherently curious mind, and I don't know that everyone's wired that way. Some people just, everyone's different.
I think that's a great point you bring up. I think it's this investigative qualities, this kind of curiosity, and it's about acting. It's about acting on it, doing the research, evaluating our experiences, getting in touch with certain communities, learning different theories, and investigating with our direct experience, but also with a bit of idealism as well to some level. We have to have some kind of imagination to some level and try to put the dots together with also some of the scientific discoveries which we have. And there's really interesting stuff. I mean, to tie in with the evidence here, we have ancient religious texts, whether it's through Hinduism about the flying vimanas, the flying vehicles in the Ramayana, and then we have, you mentioned Christianity, the book of Genesis, book of Enoch, the book of Ezekiel, where book of Ezekiel as well, about the Merkaba, about, was it an ancient form of technology through a vision? Was it kind of like a parallel, kind of a transportation through parallel universes? It's a lot of very interesting things, and we see more evidence in ancient artwork, right? In petroglyphs around the world with megalithic structures, and it's almost like even in cultural practices as well, the Paracas skull, the elongated skulls as well in some cultures in Mesoamerica and all that. So it ties in a lot with Akhenaten and Nefertiti in ancient Egypt as well, elongated skulls. And was it kind of an emulation from a certain kind of a species, because it's really interesting when you get into this. It's so vast, as you mentioned. It's a big study. It's an academic, it's a multidisciplinary academic subject.
It is. It's deep, very deep.
Yeah, and also, if we look at Tibetan Buddhism as well, since we are both practicing Dharma practitioners, we have the idea of, the Buddha, because attaining, when Siddhartha attained the level of Buddhahood, total awakening, and it's the supreme enlightenment which has omniscience of perceiving every, almost even the smallest atom, and past, present, future lives. And one of the things he taught also was about many world systems, just like ours, and this is documented in the Pali and Mahayana scriptures as well. And it's really interesting. You have this many world interpretation, and this is not new to quantum physicists now. We have mathematicians, cosmologists, and all this coming out. Like Max Tegmark, who has the four-level system. We have Brian Greene, who has actually 9 types of multiverses. And it's interesting because one of the 9 types of the multiverses, you have the quantum multiverse, you have the holographic, the simulated. One of them is a cyclic. And the cycles.
Oh, right.
It ties in with the Bhava chakra and the Kala chakra in Tibetan Buddhism, isn't it?
Oh, so does it also tie in with the yugas and stuff in Hinduism?
It's tied in with that because it's Brian Greene he's a theoretical physicist and string theorist, and he built it upon Albert Einstein's idea of having the Big Bang and then a big freeze, a big crunch. So it's almost like a series of events which keep repeating itself. So it's very similar with the different yugas in Hinduism, or the different ages as well, which we have in in Buddhism, and many ancient cosmological cycles as well. So
yeah,
it's really interesting. This is a big study.
So cool. Wow.
No,
yeah, it is one of those things where you can literally give your life to this stuff, and it's like it's the deepest academic. It's just another realm of study.
Yeah. Definitely.
And it seems like you've done a lot of your homework as well. Like you've kind of gotten into a lot of where all these ideas merge and connect.
Yeah, I think it's just also being being into spirituality, but having this fascination, like yourself, since a very young age, on the paranormal, the UFOs, supernatural, extraterrestrial, since I can't remember, maybe 5 or 6 years old. So, it's never ended, because I don't see it as separate from spirituality. I don't see it as separate from our kind of center on this planet, our role in this solar system, or even in this multiverse. I don't even call it a universe anymore. It's either an omniverse or multiverse.
Right.
It's very interesting. And have you heard of the something called the Kardashev scale?
No.
So the Kardashev scale was by a Soviet astronomer, and he actually proposed like a scale where there are different kind of civilizations. So he actually proposed 3, but now from other scientists it's been actually expanded into different scales. Carl Sagan also was influenced by his work. So Nikolai Kardashev actually mentioned of 3 civilizations: Type 1, Type 2, and Type 3. Type 1 is actually planetary civilization, where the inhabitants can actually store all the energy available on its planet. They can use and store available energy. And Carl Sagan actually put us as humanity going into the Type 1. We are still at the infancy, technological adolescence, as he calls it. Type 2 will be a stellar civilization. So we can use and control the energy of the planetary system. And
Right.
Type 3 will be a galactic civilization. So this will be a controlling energy at the scale of the entire host galaxy. So
Right.
even in the recent Star Wars films as well, like controlling the energy of the suns. Can you imagine that?
Right.
It's not solar energy as we know now. This where you have technology and even probably some kind of spiritual techniques, psychic techniques, and technology at the same time, harnessing actual suns and exhausting them physically as
Yeah.
fuel, as a kind of energy resource. Really,
I
possibilities
mean,
are
it.
there.
I mean, this is, obviously been said in the community for a long time that it's a travesty that we're still digging in the ground for energy when we have this incredible sun that would do everything, for us.
Yeah,
But, the powers that be, it's really been because of greed that it's kept us in, they say that we're like 100 years behind with our use of energy on this planet. Because of our use because of oil and carbon and how we've kind of been reliant on that. And eventually we'll get there.
yeah,
It's I'm seeing now more than ever. And I actually just ordered recently because we had a couple blackouts in this neighborhood of Los Angeles where I'm in, where the power went out. And it was kind of, in the evening, not too late or whatever. And I thought, I only have like candles and like one flashlight, you know what I mean, with batteries. And so I ordered a solar powered lantern that also has like a wind up thing so you can kind of charge it. So it doesn't take batteries, it's kind of a manual charging kind of lantern, but it has a dimmer on it. It's actually really cool. And I noticed that the whole like pocket solar power thing has gotten pretty popular. It's definitely come a long way in the past
yeah,
few years. There's a lot of little devices for charging your phone and portable little converters that can kind of run things in your house, little appliances or something,
yeah,
that are solar powered. So, but yeah, it's true. That makes sense. As a civilization, we feel for all of our incredible, all the things that we've achieved as a species. It's amazing where we are still with our use of energy. It's that's one of those areas that we gotta move along. We need to step it up.
yeah. Not only with the external energy, even internal energy as well, isn't it? I mean, we have a militarized planet, militarized world,
Yeah,
and basically we have, humanity at war with itself in a way. So even the use of the internal energy, the lack of wisdom, the lack of compassion, you know, and just this intolerance towards acceptance of humanity as it is, really, the whole class systems, patriarchy. We can get into so much socio-political affairs here, but just incoherence
yeah,
of the human species in that sense. But it's not all doom and gloom, because many people are working together, spiritual practitioners, creatives, certain politicians, even normal folk who have very altruistic humanitarian values, kindness, compassion. So
yes,
it's a lot of people who are, you know, it's not all doom
yeah.
and gloom. It's this.
Yeah, it's everything. It's true. And I was just saw a lecture a few days ago of a young, beautiful kid from India who invented some new tech with AI. He was like a AI developer, And it was a lecture about, you know, the ethical use of AI as it kind of becomes
Right.
a bigger part of our culture. And he felt really pure to me. Like, I was like, wow, you know, he's probably, you know, he may have been 20, you know what I mean? Really young, really smart. And it was really hopeful, actually, to, like, in some ways, to see that. I thought, for, you know, that's the positive side of it, that there's people that really want to approach this ethically, because obviously there'll be the other side, you know, the exploitation and use of it that isn't necessarily ethical, you know. I mean, this is the reality of being alive. It's like our species is so complex and diverse, and it's not one way or the other. All we can do is work on, you know, become the person you want to, right? It's like, just be the change, you know. It's the greatest work you could ever do. And I'm always reminded of that. It makes me just, if you bring it back to yourself, and really all the technology you need is within yourself, you know. It's like, we have all this, you know, we're starting to deify technology, you know, as a culture. And some people even say, bringing it back to extraterrestrials, that the Greys and some of these species, you know, are us in the future coming back to warn us, to say that it doesn't work. Don't, you know, you're dehumanizing yourself. And the specialness of your species is that you have this sentient emotional body. And, but you can already see it, even as a result of the times that we're in with this virus, is that, you know, we have this technology everyone's getting used to now, not being in the same room with somebody. Everyone's just doing their Zoom gatherings and their parties with their family. And it's like we're slowly being conditioned. And you think about, you know, a child born now who's just, this is the new normal, right? For them, they don't know anything else. But what's happening is that you're somewhat losing your humanness. You're becoming more machine-like and more robotic in a sense. And inevitably we might become, you know, fully hybridized humanoid machines, and really think that the technology is the way to leading a more meaningful life. And I don't know, I have a purist approach to it. I feel like if we taught, you know, if everyone was just more taught about how to harness their own mind, how to use their own innate intelligence to actually access heightened states, to, you know, activate, you know, all the energy systems in the body, you can do way more than you can do with all this technology, you know. But we keep externalizing our pursuit, you know. It's this chase outward, and I don't know that it ends well, you know. But it's okay. This is what we're going through right now. This is part of the cycle that we're in. So I'm always careful to not argue against reality, you know, because it's this is what's happening, and it's a collective thing, and there's going to be a lot of beautiful things to it. I mean, I can imagine in 20, 30, 40 years, maybe longer, you know, there'll be a time where all diseases have been eradicated, or you can just use this thing to, do you know what I mean? It's like, and it's all technology based. It's just like, we're at the tip of the iceberg, really.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to think about all that, and it's exciting and terrifying at once. It truly is, because you can see, you know, both ends of it. And I think about Shambhala, you know. I think about an enlightened society where kids, rather than being handed the iPad, you know, they're taught to meditate and do a visualization practice, to work with their own minds when they're bored, or just rather than, you know, to work with this incredible system that we've been given, rather than to go outward and to do you know what I'm saying? It's and like that to me feels way more futuristic, you know, like to really harness your own mind and to utilize it. I mean, that's the future. you
I
know.
guess I guess the
Actually,
some of the ancient Indian schools already knew this, and other civilizations like the ancient Chinese as well. Yeah,
yeah,
you
they
know.
sure did. Yeah,
So,
acupuncture, I mean,
yeah,
it's just drawing attention to these centers in your body to heal itself. I mean, it's very modern. I mean, there's a reason why it's still here and
yeah,
still
it's
being
timeless.
used.
Yeah.
It's timeless. Yeah.
So I think we are running out of time. I think we have the last few minutes. So I'd like to just share with you and the viewers as well some books I've been looking at. So there's Buddhist Cosmology here. So Buddhist
Cool.
Cosmology here, it's by Sadakata and Nakamura. So this book
Mm,
actually is quite, at some point it was quite difficult to get, but I managed to have one. So it's a philosophy and origins of Theravada and Mahayana cosmology here. So they also
very,
speak of the desire realm, the form realm, the formless realm, the different jhanas, meditative absorptions, and what
mm,
kind of deities are or celestial beings are there, or Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and how enlightenment is transcending all these states, which are actually mental states. Another book is The Treasury of Knowledge here by Jangbon
mm,
Control. This is Myriad Worlds. So you can see as well some of the sacred
right.
poetry and cosmology as well. And I'd like to also share one of the verses here from the classical text. So it mentions, furthermore, between the wind and unsurpassed lie 1 billion four-continent world systems, a great third-order thousand world system. Multiplying that by factors of 1 billion yields infinite links, continuums, oceans, and flower-filled world. Each rests on an ocean and is encircled by an outer rim. This is a sphere of influence of one supreme manifest dimension of awakening. So this is just one of the sample texts it has, and it's a commentary on one of the ancient texts as well. So it's Jamrung Control, Myriad Worlds, and
Yeah.
he's one of the leaders in the non-sectarian movement in Tibetan Buddhism. So I mean,
Mm,
in order to wrap this up, I mean, you've provided some really interesting advice as well of mindfulness, according to creativity, on how children should be introduced to meditation at such a young age to handle our inner worlds. So I'd like
yeah.
to
I
ask
mean,
you also. Oh
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, and adding to that, you
yeah,
know, because I learned recently of a friend, some of their family members who have been put on medication since a young age. And that, you know, this is very normal. A child who has ADD, you know, all these like DSM manual things, which are, I for some reason don't fully subscribe to those things. I feel like it's just you're putting labels to all these different states of mind. But these kids are being medicated, you know,
yeah,
children are being put on medication to try. It's basically a lazy parent, you know, drugging their child. And a lot of these kids are growing up medicated from a young age. So when they reach their teens or these ages where they're going through all these hormonal changes, they don't even know who they are because they've been they've been drugged up. And it's it's a travesty, you know, to see this. I feel like, again, this is where we are as a species, but this is all part of the pharmaceutical industry. There's layers to this. Why they're drugging the kids? It has to do with money, and you know, it's
greed.
it's greed. It's greed. And but you know, the parents are susceptible to the advice of the professional, and you know what I mean. And there's so many layers to this, but so
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting time. It really is an interesting time, and I'm always grateful to be speaking with you, Joshua. We're brothers,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, we
We
are
have
brothers,
a lot in
definitely.
common. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so
or
it's like, to sum this up as well, I mean, I'm sure Paul and I, we both advocate and support the idea of taking care of oneself, body and mind, and, having a healthy diet, having enough sleep, take care of your nutrition as well as your water intake, focus on our mind, what is going through our mind, and also observing the mind, training the mind, being mindful, investigate meditation, investigate yoga practices, body and energy movement practices, Tai Chi, Qigong, Hatha yoga, and also keep the mind and heart open to all these topics. cosmologies, comparative religion, the paranormal, the supernatural, because this can actually enrich and invigorate our life.
Yeah.
So definitely, to sum it up, we have a lot of things in common. And one last question before we go. It's on a serious fun note. What would you say or ask an extraterrestrial during an encounter or abduction? One question.
Like if I was abducted tonight or today, and
Yeah.
like they said I can ask them a question.
Yes.
What should I name my record? What's the name of the album? I don't know. You know what I mean? I'm going directly to a creative process, because it's like, this is, that's a good one. That is a good one. I love that artwork too.
Yeah.
You got to give me those 2 books. I'm going to look those up.
I'll send you, after this call, I'll send you a photo of the books, and you can find them on Amazon. So
Very
once
cool.
again, Paul, thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your sharing. I think 1 hour is never enough to delve.
Yeah, we'll do this again soon. There's a lot of layers to this, and I'm realizing, because of our time difference, we can go later. I can go like start later in the morning for you and later in the day for me, which would be easy as well. So
yeah, definitely. Let's see how the schedules are, and we can definitely do something. Definitely, either August or September. Let's see where we are both at. And
Great.
Once again, Paul, thanks for your sharing, your expertise, your knowledge, your wisdom, your compassion. And I hope everyone enjoyed this, and it will be uploaded soon. So have a blessed week and take care.